Hi everyone, my name is Avery Tokuyama. I'm one of the summer interns here at CFROG. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our presentation on a report of electric vehicle development and infrastructure here in Ventura County. We're really excited to share our findings and our recommendations with you all. So with that, we'll get started and I'll pass it off to Haley.
Awesome. Thank you, Avery. Thank you again all for being here to hear from our student interns and hear their impressive and impactful research that they completed this summer. So for those of you new to CFROG, we are an environmental advocacy nonprofit dedicated to transitioning Ventura County and beyond to a fossil fuel-free future. I'm Haley Ehlers, the Associate Executive Director. And this particular research and our future work in green workforce development is in partnership with Local 585 LiUNA and the Tri-Counties Building and Construction Trades Council, and is supported by our Community Air Grant from the California Air Resources Board. Additionally, all four of the presenters you'll hear from today are alumni of our Environmental Voices Academy, which is an advocacy and education training program for high schoolers here in the county. So if you're interested in CFROG and our future plans in workforce development and education, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. And finally, I'll pass it back over to Avery.
Hi again, everyone. Like I was saying a little bit earlier, my name is Avery Tokuyama. I am a rising senior at Westlake High School in Westlake Village, California. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also an environmental emphasis candidate and mentor in the career emphasis program at my school.
Hi everyone, my name is Molly McCoy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently studying environmental policy as a sophomore at Moore Park Community College in preparation for my transfer to UC Davis next year.
Hi, I'm Christy and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a rising senior at Camarillo High School and I'm co-president of our school's Naturally Green Club.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Massey. I use the she, her pronouns, and I'm a rising sophomore at UC Berkeley, and I'm studying environmental studies. I also work with California Youth versus Big Oil, the UC Green New Deal Coalition, and I run my social media account Action with Alex. So without further ado, here is our final report that we've worked on for the past 2 months. Our report is called Recommendations on Ventura County Equitable Electric Vehicle Implementation. So just for a little bit of background, we know that climate change and urbanization are two inevitable circumstances for Ventura County that have already made landfall. Droughts, dangerous wildfires, and heat waves are some of the common climate change-induced weather patterns becoming more frequent in Ventura County. Fossil fuel facilities contribute to global climate change and worsen local public health in frontline communities in Ventura County, further perpetuating inequities faced by communities of low income, Black and Indigenous and people of color, or BIPOC, as we'll refer to it in this presentation. Housing crises in California emphasize the need for affordable multi-unit housing complexes to shelter Ventura County residents as well.
These trends are not going away soon. Rather, they are catalyzed by businesses as usual ways of living. But this does not have to be the case. In 2022, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, stresses that small-scale government can achieve bold climate action. The IPCC also states that climate-resilient communities can be built when prioritizing the needs of historically underrepresented communities. Ventura County can be the leader of climate action, which is what we are here to say today.
In this report, we center environmental justice and address systematic barriers that communities face in the transition to equitable transportation. We hope this inspires policymakers, businesses, laborers, and residents like yourselves to collaborate and reimagine the transportation sector to be clean and equitable in Ventura County. This report includes key concepts, research methodology, and discussion of recommendations we have for the county. We seek to empower the county to address actions that we found were missing or lacked urgency. These recommendations are not extensive, and many communities and organizations are working toward equitable transportation, among other climate and social justice goals. We encourage you to reach out and facilitate relationships with these groups for their input. I'll pass it now to Avery to discuss our literature review that guided our report.
So in our literature review, we learned that the modern electric vehicle has been available since the early 1970s, but the 1997 introduction of the Prius hybrid and the birth of Tesla Motors is really what demarcates the real spike in EV popularity. Since then, America has had over 2.32 million electric vehicle sales and thus an increasing demand for charging infrastructure. Through a review, we found numerous funding opportunities from both federal and state agencies for EV charging infrastructure and concluded that a greater investment in EV charging stations, support for workforce development in the EV sector, and a provision of resources to the public can help shift consumer opinions and allow for EV adoption to prosper in Ventura County.
The following concepts informed our research and recommendations, the first being just transition. The concept was first introduced in 2015 at the Conference of Parties, COP21. It is a concept developed by the trade union movement to ensure an equitable transportation from fossil fuel-centric economy to a sustainable one. A just transition simultaneously combats the climate crisis and systemic inequalities by prioritizing the needs of impacted communities, such as workers, low-income, and BIPOC communities, through accessible solutions.
Our next term is frontline communities. Frontline communities are groups of people that experience the first and worst impacts of systemic issues such as climate change. Oftentimes, frontline communities are made of underserved populations such as low-income BIPOC communities and people in rural areas. Frontline communities exist all around the world, including here in Ventura County. Collaborating with and respecting the needs of frontline communities is vital for establishing a just transition that prioritizes the needs of all people.
In California state law, environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Communities that have been subjected to environmental injustices have been fighting for the principles of environmental justice for centuries, but the formal concept did not become popularized until the 1980s by Black environmental activists Robert Bullard and Hazel M. Johnson. Lagging behind social movement policymakers first used the term environmental justice was first used in government policy language by the EPA.
Our last concepts are climate action plans, which are typically subsets for general plans. They provide federal, state, regional, and local governments with resources to implement sustainable policies and practices, especially pertaining to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. As of 2021, 34 states in the US have adopted CAPs. So overall, our literature review has allowed us to identify gaps, trends, and important practices that surrounding areas are implementing in order to make recommendations for practices and policies specific to Ventura County, informed by the principles of just transition and environmental justice.
Now we're going to move on to our methodology that guided our research. So we researched various materials pertinent to EVs, including references that some of you may have been a part of making. First, we analyzed the Ventura County EV Ready Blueprint, which is a hefty document that acts as a guide for Ventura County's EV adoption. Some things we found that Ventura County and cities have already accomplished include establishing an EV coach to help with EV adoption and participation from community groups in local EV events. Ventura County has also begun using EV fleets, which is a great step, which we'll talk about later. Thousand Oaks is also working to establish bike lanes that are a lot safer and more accessible. However, we did notice from our research and by living and driving around Ventura County that a lot of the EV Ready Blueprint has not been accomplished thus far, especially related to EV charging station infrastructure. So we encourage the county to rapidly increase EV charging station infrastructure with an emphasis on sourcing local labor and to amplify consumer opportunities for zero emission transportation to get more people on the road with EVs. Next, Molly and Christy will talk about local and regional climate action plans.
We looked at local climate action plans, including the Oxnard EV Plan, Thousand Oaks Sustainability Plan, Ventura's Energy Action Plan, and the Ventura County 2040 General Plan. We did notice that many cities did not have a climate action plan at all, or had minimal outdated information on their website. It is vital that cities align and implement their climate action plans with county and statewide goals, which is why we call on the cities in Ventura County to create their own plans.
We analyzed other plans from California areas to identify which other cities and counties are working towards clean transportation methods. These plans included the Los Angeles County Draft 2045 Climate Action Plan, Oakland, San Diego, and Santa Barbara Climate Action Plans, and Kern County EV Charging Station Blueprint.
We also reviewed several resources from the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, which is a forum of 6 different counties that work together to address some of the regional issues. Resources such as the Clean Cities Coalition, the SoCal PEV Readiness Plan, and the Southern California EV Charging Station Study emphasized the need for both workplace and residential charging, with a focus on multi-unit dwelling development. It also centered attention on ensuring an increase in EV infrastructure, specifically in underserved communities.
We also conducted interviews with EV experts, workers, and stakeholders to learn about community needs for EV adoption. We spoke with Michelle Bogan, who's a EV researcher from PG&E. We spoke with Joshua Medrano, the Exec Secretary Treasurer of Tri-County's Building and Construction Trades Council. We spoke with Anthony Morellis, the business manager of Laborers Local 585 LiUNA. We also spoke with Kent Bullard, an EV technical coach at VC Regional Energy Alliance and a member of the EV Advocates of Ventura County, as well as the Ventura County Green Cleans Job Coalition, and Nancy Claren, the VC Regional Energy Alliance EV coach. We also want to thank everyone who we spoke to for guiding our research. Moving on to the main section of our report, we will also share our recommendations from the discussion section of our actual document. Our recommendations pertain to economic development, widespread EV infrastructure implementation, and various zero-emission transportation methods, all while centering equitable EV adoption.
So the first topic we'll touch on is how electric vehicles fit into our local economy. The adoption of EVs is an integral part of cultivating a climate resilient county. In 13 years, internal combustion engine or ICE vehicles will no longer be available for purchase in California as per Governor Newsom's executive order N7920. As a result, the state's transportation sector will be dramatically transformed within the coming years, with the California Energy Commission estimating that there will be around 7.5 million EVs on the road by 2030. So not only will the expansion of EV use reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it will also create new economic opportunities. And what's more, Ventura County can take certain actions to ensure that our local economy benefits from this increase in EV adoption. So the first opportunity is in manufacturing. An increase in demand for electric vehicles equates to an expansion of manufacturing facilities to produce not only the vehicles, but also the chargers that will be needed to power the cars. Cities such as Santa Paula, Fillmore, and Oxnard have room to host the manufacturing of EVs and chargers. However, it's important to note that these parts of Ventura County have been most impacted by climate and environmental degradation issues, as well as systemic equities. So it's important that there's a focus on equitable and locally sourced labor. Additionally, the Port of Hueneme will allow for an expedited distribution process of goods manufactured here in the county. In addition to manufacturing, the automotive technician industry is a notable area of job growth. California possesses unique automotive technician job growth, a projected 15% increase in technician jobs compared to the nationwide 5%. As California continues to see a rise in electric vehicle adoption, trained EV service technicians will become increasingly necessary to meet the demand for vehicle servicing, specifically on electric vehicles. Ventura County's support for local training programs to teach automotive technicians the skills necessary to service electric vehicles will be vital in filling this industry gap. And finally, there are numerous job opportunities within the infrastructure sector. An increase in EV use will result in more EV infrastructure to support those charging needs, including public and private adoption of EV chargers in residencies, workplaces, and commercial locations. EV infrastructure provides numerous job opportunities, including electrical work, construction work, public planning, and engineering, all depending on the type of charging station. But as we've emphasized, it's important that the transition to these jobs is fair and equitable. With the rising cost of living, which is particularly acute in California, salaries for newly created jobs in the EV industry should be competitive and livable. It's important that wages are able to support residents based on the cost of living here in Ventura County so that labor can be sourced locally. Ventura County can ensure benefits and fair wages through unions, such as the local 585 LiUNA and Tri-County's Building and Construction Trades Council. Employers can support unionization, and our local governments can contract their EV-related projects out to unionized workforces. So with that being said, we have several recommendations that our local governments can take in order to promote this economic growth. Ventura County can support manufacturing expansions, especially through the development of an economic action plan. A comprehensive outline of Ventura County's economic future will increase companies' attraction to the area and likelihood of establishing factories locally. Like I said earlier, support for labor training programs will help to make the jobs in the EV industry accessible. And in addition, government funding and support for the commissioning of EV infrastructure can create job opportunities within the county and increase the appeal of EV adoption as it becomes easier to charge and service vehicles, which leads into the importance of increasing the appeal of EVs. So I'll pass it over to Molly to talk a little bit more about electric vehicle public perception.
Despite the anticipated surge in EV sales, a significant portion of the general public has limited EV knowledge. Ventura County can assist in such endeavors by strengthening the public's perception of EVs, advertising the available incentives for customers, and expanding the county's EV charging network. Vehicle dealerships can hurt EV sales, since some dealerships have offered EV certifications for their employees. But due to the nature of the industry, employees frequently change sites, and their previous training is not transferable. The county should publicize free and universal training programs for sales representatives, such as the one offered by the National Fire Protection Association. The virtual guide addresses topics like EV charging basics and concerns, economic and personal benefits from EV ownership, and common misconceptions regarding EVs. This training provides dealership representatives with the tools and knowledge to properly inform customers about EVs and encourage higher sales. The affordability of EVs has greatly increased, but the price tags can still be daunting for some consumers. There are several online EV rebates, but yet the public isn't aware of their existence. Ventura County can mitigate this issue by adding EV resources to all city and county websites, as well as amplifying the county's social media presence to reach and educate a large audience. The county can also encourage school districts to include EV resource information on their websites, in parent newsletters, and at gatherings such as open houses. Finally, Ventura County should work with and fund social and environmental justice regional organizations to maximize community outreach. Another way for Ventura County to improve the reputation of EVs is to host and sponsor ride and drive events, which allow the public to test drive EVs and talk to EV owners. The Ventura County Regional Energy Alliance and the Ventura County EV Advocates host these events throughout the year. Finally, Ventura County should be looking to address range anxiety, since EVs have a set mile limit depending on their battery, similar to how an ICE vehicle's range is determined by its fuel tank capacity. Expanding EV charging infrastructure can reduce charging stress and encourage consumers to purchase an EV. This expansion relies upon Ventura County's willingness to streamline permits and engage with regional EV stakeholders. Currently, there is $1.1 million available in incentives dedicated to installing level 2 EV chargers here within Ventura County, as per the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project. We highly encourage any regional policymakers or stakeholders to pursue this opportunity, as California anticipates a massive influx in new EVs within the coming years, and the state will require adequate charging stations.
So public and workplace parking lots often hold a significant number of vehicles for long durations of time while owners are either working, spending the day relaxing, or engaging in recreational activities. Public and workplace charging tremendously benefits the general public and, most importantly, the frontline communities by making transportation costs more accessible, especially for those without access to home chargers, making charging more affordable, and improving air quality. Workplace charging stations increases convenience for EV owners, thus encourages EV owners to work in locations with EV charging. During the 8-hour working period, some EVs can be fully charged with a level 2 charger. Charging municipal fleets with direct current fast chargers throughout the day also decreases fuel and operating costs for the institution. In order to further reduce concerns of EV costs, Ventura County should consider systematic charging, such as various load management systems. Methods such as rotational charging allow multiple chargers to charge with a single circuit, would greatly reduce the cost of installing multiple chargers. Public and commercial locations such as plazas, malls, and grocery stores have long vehicle dwell times. During this time, EVs can be conveniently charged with lower charging costs, incentivizing EV drivers to shop and work at these locations. As consumer activity increases, revenue made from charging does as well, which can be used to offset operation and maintenance costs for charging stations. It's important to consider the cost of installing EVs. These costs are listed on the slide. Workplace and public institutions can support level 1 and level 2 chargers. These prices are much cheaper than commonly speculated by the general public, implying that the installation of public and workplace charging is an achievable goal. Though upfront installation costs may be somewhat hefty, costs can be covered by various methods we'll be discussing in the next couple of slides. But I'd like to emphasize that it is vital for Ventura County to invest in the development of EV charging stations and accessible, frequent locations for EV drivers, because EV adoption by the public can only happen if public spaces integrate the infrastructure needed to support EVs. EV charging is not only more sustainable, but also more affordable when power for charging stations is renewably sourced. Time of use methods, an electricity rate system only allowing charging when electricity is cheapest, also cuts down on operation costs. Time of use would be determined by when solar panels are most efficient throughout the day in the case of sourcing from solar renewable grids. Currently, 9 of 16 cities in Ventura County, as well as unincorporated Ventura County, have opted into the Clean Power Alliance, or the CPA, providing private and residential properties with renewable energy. So opting into the CPA ensures that EV charging is not further contributing to the consumption of fossil fuels. Currently, the CPA does not have the ability to provide for most larger scale public and workplace institutions, which suggests that these charging stations must rely on either an alternative renewable energy provider or an independent energy grid. Ventura County should facilitate and encourage public and workplace centers to seek out renewable energy sources. Property owners must consider which pay method would benefit EV owners while also paying for operational costs. Some payment options from EV stations include fixed rates, free charging, pay per energy consumed, subscription, and fixed fees. In public and commercial lots, fixed rate pricing is determined by the time spent connected to the charger. This incentivizes drivers to move their vehicle after charging, making more space for additional EVs to charge. Free workplace EV charging incentivizes employees to work at the location by increasing for affordability of transportation from home to work and vice versa. And another commonly used method to pay off a portion of EVs is by requiring employees to pay for their charging, most commonly achieved through subscriptions. Nevertheless, the employer determines the most efficient pay method at their site, and this should be informed of different payment methods by Ventura County EV initiatives. Additionally, the adoption of renewable source EV charging stations is an opportunity for our business and property owners to highlight their dedication towards a shift to renewable energy. highlight their environmental values, and emphasize technological progression, furthermore making them more attractive towards the public. While EVs are a more climate-friendly option than ICE vehicles, the best solution for climate resilience means including clean and accessible methods of public and alternative transportation, which is covered by the next section and by Alex.
Thank you, Christy. Great segue. So for my section, I looked at a lot of different types of transportation, and it's really important to emphasize and recognize the value and need for other methods of transportation that reduce emissions and decrease people's reliance on cars. Significant inequities will persist if we rely solely on people purchasing EVs to reduce county greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. Ventura County can and should implement many alternative transportation methods, as we'll talk about next. So with the rise of urbanization that we mentioned before, as more people come to Ventura County, we should take advantage for the opportunity of increased active transportation, which is transportation powered by human energy, usually walking or biking. Creating safe and accessible biking lanes and sidewalks, installing bike racks in frequented areas to encourage biking, and establishing car-free areas like Main Street in Ventura will all promote healthy lifestyles and reduce emissions in Ventura County. I personally love biking around my hometown of Camarillo, but I've noticed that shopping centers and places I often park my bike don't have a lot of racks. So we need to make sure that we're facilitating more, as we said, EV adoption and infrastructure. We need to also increase active transportation infrastructure. Another form of transportation that we should implement is clean public transportation. Ventura County should speed up the transition to clean public transit to surpass the California Air Resource Board's innovative clean transit mandates. Public transit must travel frequently through high employment and heavily populated residential areas to meet residents' traveling needs. This also opens up opportunities for jobs and development in city planning and transportation jobs. In order for people to want to use public transit, Ventura County should incentivize it as much as possible. In California, there is a big car-centric culture, as you probably all know, but Ventura County can promote public transit ridership with widespread awareness and education campaigns in low-income communities. Ventura County can also offer incentives such as reduced cost or free ridership for different populations, such as the elderly, students, and low-income residents. As for school transportation, Ventura County should switch to electric school buses to transition already frequented bus routes to clean electricity. There are also a lot of grants and state funding that can support these public transit transitions. Ventura County should even explore micromobility options, which are things like e-bikes and e-scooters, to aid residents in traveling the distances from public transit stops to workplaces, stores, and housing. The last transportation method that I'll share about is EV ridership app vehicles. As rideshare apps like Uber, Lyft, and Zipcar grow in popularity, Ventura County can promote and mandate EVs as the primary option for ride-sharing vehicles by partnering with these companies. For informing policy on EV rideshare apps, Ventura County can access the UC Davis 3 Revolutions Future Mobility Program and the LA Urban Mobility in the Digital Age, as recommended by the EV Ready Blueprint. Overall, Ventura County must implement a variety of zero-emission options for transportation, not just limited to EVs. We can do this with increased walking and biking, public transit, and EV rideshare vehicles. Incorporating a variety of clean, green, safe transportation options will improve the health, air quality, and mobility of all Ventura County residents. Next, I'll talk about electrifying vehicles that are used for industrial and commercial needs as opposed to residential. So the influx of goods movement services like Amazon is an opportunity for Ventura County to be proactive in facilitating the transition to zero-emission fleets outside of the residential sector. So Ventura County has already begun the electrification of county fleet vehicles, as we mentioned before, which should be applauded, continued, and expanded. Some of these EVs are charged by beam solar panels, which are essentially units that have solar panels on top of them to directly charge the cars. And this is a fantastic way to harness renewable energy for EV charging. These fleets also improve public perception of EVs when the EV vehicles are more common and people see them around. Next, we can talk about the electrification of Port of Hueneme vehicles. So the Port of Hueneme shipping vehicles can be electrified because EV options for medium and heavy duty vehicles are becoming more available and reliable. Ventura County can look to the Port of Oakland section of the Oakland Climate Action Plan and apply the electrification and emission reduction strategies to the Port of Hueneme. Lastly, Ventura County should align with shipping and goods movement companies to ensure that they have ambitious, actionable plans for EV trucks and shipping options. Operating in Ventura County should mean that these companies align with and exceed the county's electrification and climate resilience goals. I'll pass it back to Avery.
Thanks, Alex. So as we've seen throughout the entirety of this presentation, such a drastic transition from ICE vehicles requires a very multifaceted approach. An inclusive and comprehensive EV workforce development plan is another installment in such an endeavor. When outlining the county electric vehicle training program, it's crucial to consider the environmental injustices that marginalized communities have suffered within Ventura County, as well as the county's language barriers. This involves hiring individuals who are proficient in Spanish, specifically the Mixtec Indigenous dialect, since nearly 40% of the county's population doesn't speak English at home. Another recommendation is to incorporate culturally and socially sensitive training to build community trust. The majority of Ventura County's EV workers should be hired directly from the region's available workforce to strengthen county economic and social prospects. All EV workers should be able to easily explain EV concepts, as there is a plethora of misinformation surrounding the electric vehicle industry, which can impair the general public perception, hurting the transition to renewable transportation. Ventura County's EV workforce training programs should be affordable, allowing equal access for all, and ensuring that labor is not outsourced to other counties. As previously mentioned, the region's EV infrastructure will need to grow to sustain the massive influx of vehicles. The county should use this as an opportunity to provide historically marginalized communities with new, safe, and green jobs. As a population, Ventura County deserves the right to accessible and environmentally friendly jobs.
While our report has discussed the gaps in Ventura County's EV response and plans, the region's climate strengths haven't gone unnoticed. Ventura County's expanding workforce, openings for EV manufacturing, and market and consumer demand for EVs and clean energy are great areas of potential. We are optimistic about the future of EVs in the region. Ventura County has shown its capability to join and transform the renewable transportation market. Shifting from fossil fuels can be intimidating. However, the county isn't alone in this endeavor. Rather, it is a collective effort across regional, state, and federal levels. Given the United States car-centric infrastructure, our need to decarbonize methods of private transportation is not only urgent, it is also integral to the country's successful commitment to climate agreements, such as the Paris Climate Accords. Now is the time to fully live up to California's reputation as a climate leader, which it can and should start here. Monumental and worthwhile change originates in small communities, and we implore you all to consider what power you have as an individual and how you can use it to accomplish our recommendations. Above all, we'd like to stress the importance of the fact that EVs alone cannot provide a buffer against the climate crisis. An equal amount of attention and resources given to EVs should also be dedicated to improving Ventura County's public transportation and infrastructure. Remodeling transportation is a complex issue that stretches beyond EVs and involves all of our community. It is our hope that this report initiates and furthers local progress within the automobile and urban planning industries across all disciplines in the coming years. As young environmental students, we are incredibly passionate about implementing sustainable development and environmental justice in our future applications. Until then, we are dependent on community members and leaders like yourselves to act in a timely manner. The climate crisis is a current humanitarian issue, and incoming and future generations aren't the only ones who can address it. We must confront our dependence on fossil fuels as a united front and take the necessary steps to make an equitable county and planet for all. The time for change is now here in Ventura County.
Thank you all so much for attending and listening to our final report. We've obviously worked really hard on this and hope you use it as a guide for EV implementation and getting the conversation about EVs literally rolling. Now we'll open up the conversation to any questions or comments. So please use the raise hand function and wait until one of us calls on you before you unmute. You can also use the chat function to ask any questions. So we'll wait about a minute unless anyone has any questions right now, but feel free to think of some questions and we'll call on you in a moment. Go ahead, John Brooks. You'll probably need to unmute. There you go. Ooh, try one more time. You're muted.
John, I think you're still muted, but I did receive your question in the form beforehand. So I can ask that if, okay, you're good now. Go ahead.
I'm curious as to the question of whether 40% of homes in Ventura County do not speak English at home. That sounds like a really big number. I know there's a lot of immigrants and immigrant families, but that's almost 50%. Where'd you get that number?
I found that number while I was reading the Ventura EV blueprint. It was found within the 2020 census data.
I will drop a link to that in the, Molly, you said it was in the EV blueprint, is that correct? Or the census report? One of the two.
Yeah, I was in the, it's in the report clicked on there.
Okay, awesome. I'll see if I can find a link to that, John. So give me a moment and I'll try and put that in the chat. Jimmy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to know if there are any cross programs between people with solar panels on their roofs and people who are obtain EV cars. In other words, is there a way to, are there any programs available to get a lower car price if you have the panels, or to get lower panel prices if you already have an EV?
Yeah, so I believe Edison, they do provide incentives for people who own electric vehicles, as well as the CPA also has incentives for that. But you would probably have to go on their website to look through that.
That was Southern California discounts for people with EVs. And are there any discounts for getting solar panels installed if you have an EV? Is that what you were saying? It's hard to hear you.
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
So were you mentioning Southern California Edison has discounts for people with EVs? Is that what you said, Christy?
Yeah.
Do you know if there's any installation discounts for people with EVs, or discounts for people wanting to buy EVs if they have solar panels? Just sort of a cross promotional type of thing.
I actually don't know about that, but we could look into it and then get back to you.
Ken, did you raise your hand in response to that question, or do you have another question?
I did. There
Okay.
are no programs that tie you directly between solar and batteries and EVs. The only thing Edison really offers as far as EVs is they do offer different tariff rates for EVs, but you are not required to have solar. It's a natural growth with people. They have a solar system and they decide I'm going to get a car, then they're getting batteries, or it's the other way around. People who've adopted EVs are thinking about what they're doing, and they see the opportunities with solar and batteries, and they're doing all they can to help improve their environmental impact. That's it.
Awesome, thanks, Ken.
I see a question in the chat that says, from Elaine, that says, did your research investigate problems and solutions for battery creation, disposal, scarcity of needed raw materials for batteries? So if anyone would like to answer this, if you're on the panel, feel free.
So our research didn't cover that topic. We kind of focused a little bit more on the infrastructure side of things, but I think most of us are aware that this is an issue. I think that would definitely be something interesting to look at, but unfortunately, in our timeline of the summer internship, we did not have a chance to look at that.
I will add on to that and say that I guess sort of an indirect way that we can combat how much resources we need for batteries is to make sure that we're shifting more towards public transportation and other forms of transportation, such as biking and walking, things that don't require a battery, or would be like an electric bus, which although it has like a large battery, that's probably less, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, than several cars if the people were, taking their own cars versus going on an electric bus. So that is sort of an indirect way to transition off of a car-centric culture, is to make sure that we have different types of transportation methods, which also ties into city planning and having more walkable, bikeable, bus-oriented cities. So hopefully that answers your question just a little bit, but as Avery said, we didn't directly investigate batteries. If no one else has any questions right now, we can move on to some questions that we collected beforehand. So I'll go through, you move to the next slide, and we'll answer some of these questions. Okay. So one of the first question, which I think I will pass to Molly, is I have been trying for months to get the size EV that I need. Dealers have very few on the lot. Is demand for, I believe, larger EVs super high? And also, if Molly, if you want to expand more about dealerships as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. So in our research, we did learn that the materials obtained for batteries are very rare, and the pandemic has caused supply chain issues all across industries, and that applies to EVs. And so there is an increasing demand, as we will be seeing more EVs on the road here in California due to Governor Newsom's executive order, but it's also due to some backlog of the raw materials that are needed to construct these batteries. So hopefully, as the pandemic, starts to lessen, we will see reduced stress on the supply chains.
I think we would also recommend, which we talked about in our we touched on a little bit in our presentation, but definitely more in our actual document, is used EVs. Although they may not be as like brand spanking new as new EVs, purchasing a used EV is also really helpful, because then that car and battery are not being junked, they're being used once again. So that might be another way to find an EV. It might not be as, sizes might be different, but that would be a good way to reuse something that is old. I will ask the next question. And again, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. One of the questions is, it is clear overall US infrastructure needs improvement. Do you see opportunities for new EV infrastructure to improve general roads, parking lots, bridges, etc.? If anyone would like to answer this, feel free. I can answer this one. So obviously, a lot of infrastructure needs to be repaired, and it's also another opportunity to shift towards a more clean future, which some of the things we looked at were parking maximums as opposed to parking minimums, which means like, instead of just building tons of parking, making sure that parking isn't, like, if you want to transition more to a car-free area, reducing the amount of parking, which can free up space for other city planning and business opportunities. Also, if parking lots need to be sort of revamped, you can install like protective covers and things like solar, which is a great way to implement more EV charging stations. So I definitely think there is an opportunity for EV infrastructure to be implemented within just general improvements. If anyone else would like to answer this question as well, feel free.
Yeah, to add on, talking more about like alternative modes of transportation, such as biking, creating like protected bike lanes is completely doable based on existing roads that we have. It's just that it needs to be done. The city has to like approve of this.
The next question is, how do we see economic action plans and climate action plans working together?
I think I can answer this one. I'll be the first to admit I am not an expert in policy or public planning. But in the research that we did do throughout this internship, I think one way that I saw these two working together was economic action plans sort of being a tool to implement some of the policies and practices that are detailed in climate action plans. So in that example that I gave earlier in the presentation, an economic action plan could help to attract companies and encourage them to establish manufacturing facilities here in Ventura County, which creates green, clean, environmentally friendly jobs, which is often a component of climate action plans. So I'm not sure if that answered your question holistically, but that's one way I see them working together. I'm not sure if anyone would like to add on to that answer.
I'd like to add on that personally. I feel that climate and economic action plans should be intertwined because climate change is a legitimate thing that is already here. So it really must be considered as a factor for any economic plan, just based on like the reality of what's happening. So not only do I think they should work together, I think they must work together for an economy to be sustained and vice versa for us to adequately address the climate crisis. We definitely need to ensure that we're building a better, cleaner economy for everyone else. Christy, Molly, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think that's why just transition is so important, because economics and climate do go hand in hand, and we need to ensure that future jobs are accessible and equitable for all, and we must make sure that all communities are being heard and taken care of.
Thank you, Molly. And lastly, another question was, what should be prioritized first, public and workplace charging or residential charging? I think I'll pass this to Christy.
Yeah, so honestly, both of them should be prioritized, but if you were to have to choose one, it would probably be public and workplace charging, because residential charging, like and private charging, might not be affordable towards some people. Some people might not be able to afford their own charger to have in their own house. So public and workplace charging makes owning an EV a lot more affordable when prices are like free, or like shared, like you share the fees to pay off for operational costs. So as for residential, MUDs or multi-unit dwellings are highly like prioritized in EV implementation, because that is where living is concentrated. So it's not as privatized as residential, like private chargers, if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. I think it's really important to emphasize that both of them need to be happening at the same time, because if you have a public or a private charger in your own garage, but you can't take your vehicle on longer trips, like that's going to cause a problem. But we also want to make sure that people are able to charge their vehicles at home, because that just makes a lot of sense and makes it easier to get to and from work and other places. So making sure that we're emphasizing both at the same time. That is all the questions we got, I believe, on the form. So I'd like to open it up. Does anyone else have any more questions? You can ask about us, you can ask about the internship, or any other questions you might have about EVs. All right, with that being said, I think we're pretty close to the 6 o'clock, so I'll pass it to Haley for a little bit of a wrap up.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alex. I just wanted to mention again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, round of applause for our panelists and researchers and writers and presenters. But I wanted to mention that this presentation and the full report will be available next week on our website. So if you missed something, wanted to, look back on the presentation or any of the thoughts that were, any of the recommendations that were made, that report will be available on our website, cfrog.org, and likely on our social media accounts as well. And please, if you know anyone that missed the presentation, a recording will be available as well. So be sure to share within your networks. And I'm hoping that, this makes an impact in local EV implementation. So thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for being here. If there's anything that you want to end with, happy to hear from you. If not, I can let you all go and have a great Thursday and Friday and weekend. Thank you all again for your support, and be sure to check out their final report next week.
You guys are awesome. Keep it up.
Thank you all for coming.